What's up, guys and goddesses? My name is Paris Khalees. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I want to start off the video by first saying make sure to like, follow, subscribe, keep up with me, engage with me, and engage on my YouTube channel, which I'm trying to be more consistent on and post as much as I can anytime I have the time to. And also make sure to follow me on all of my social medias and my social media platforms, and follow me on Instagram and TikTok. That will be in the intro, and it'll also be in the bio below. So as y'all can see by the title, today's video I'm doing one of my podcasts, one of my sit-in talks basically. So I haven't necessarily came up with a name that I kind of want to do for these podcasts, but this is just basically my podcast that I put on my YouTube channel, where I just do deep talks and we get in depth with the things. And today is something that I kind of was able to recognize on my conscious journey, and I wanted to share on my YouTube channel as well. So yes, as you can see by the title, today's video, I put basically it's about the ego, and I feel like it's important that we talk about the ego because I feel like every person on the planet has an ego. It's something that we all have in common, and it's basically our sense of self. It's basically a part of ourselves that every single person has, and I feel like it's important to recognize the ego and understand what the ego is, and know how to really understand your ego helps you operate better throughout each day. So I wrote a couple of notes and stuff, but just to help me kind of roll along with my chat, but I basically know most of this off the head. So what is an ego, and like why is it important to recognize your ego? So let's start off with that. So what is an ego? Your ego is basically a person's sense of self-esteem or self-importance. This is basically the basic definitions that I got off of like online, but I'm gonna give y'all my personal definition as well. It is the part of the mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious, and is responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. So yes, your ego is very important. My definition of the ego is basically, I feel like your ego is the lower aspect of yourself. Not saying that it's lower in a bad way. I feel like we shouldn't look at things as good or bad, because that's the polarity of everything. Basically what I mean by that is that a lot of people look at things from a black and white perspective, or good or bad, or this and that, when we have to look at everything much deeper than that. I think it's a much deeper picture than that. And I feel like when I say lower, I don't mean in a bad way. I feel like your ego is very important because your ego is your protector. It serves as a protectant and mediates, of course, as well between your conscious and unconscious mind, but it serves as a protectant. It's our protector, and I'm gonna explain what I mean by that. So basically, I feel like there's three parts. This is some way that I look at it. Some people may look at it different, because I feel like there's several parts of us as well, but I feel like a way that helps me, I look at it as three parts. So I look at it as our higher self, ourself, and our ego. I feel like they have to balance. I don't look at it as just like lower aspect as the ego, but I feel like it's a balance. Like you still need your ego. It's very important. And I'm gonna get more in depth of why I don't really believe in an ego death. I believe in an ego transformation, and I'm gonna explain exactly what I mean by that. Because your ego never goes away. It's still there. You can start to understand your ego, and I think that could be the process of an ego death, but your ego always stays there. It's just important to recognize it and understand it. So I think that's what the whole ego death is you finally understanding your ego. And then that's when you choose whether or not you want to transform your ego and how to operate within your ego and how it can help serve you each day. So why is it important to recognize your ego? It's important to recognize your ego so that you don't serve your ego, so that you don't be in your ego and not even know or be aware that you're in your ego. To not let your ego basically run you. You're supposed to have it's supposed to be a balance between self, ego, and higher self. Because your ego is you. It's a part of yourself. We must embrace both the light and the dark parts of ourselves. Not saying it's in a polarity, or good or bad, or light and dark have to be good and bad when they're both can be good and bad. But your ego is very important. It's important that your ego serves you. And once you most people that go through an ego death, they start to recognize, okay, your ego transforming. Basically what happens is that your ego transforms to serve you rather than you serving your ego. A lot of times we get upset with things, or we come to the fence. Like at times, for example, like when you're in your ego is when you're in a defensive mode. Not saying that's a bad thing, but sometimes it can be, at times we can be unnecessary. Like if somebody said something and it's good to stand up for yourself and stuff. A lot of times that's our ego coming through because it's a protector. It's like, oh, your ego hearing something it might not like or might not agree with, and then it comes out and it's like, hold on. And then sometimes we can talk to people and our ego be coming through and be a whole different part of ourselves. We be like, man, like, or if you get in an argument, your ego definitely, it's definitely a big difference between having a disagreement and having an argument. And I can say most of the time, if you having a disagreement, it's also a way to kind of mediate your ego into serving you and being able to do it in a righteous way to talk to somebody rather than having a straight argument, and then that's when you're basically serving your ego. So a lot of times in life we don't recognize it because we're just operating, but it's good to take that time to check in with self and then recognize, like, that's why it's very good to balance your crown chakra as well with your ego, because then that way you don't necessarily get too offended by what somebody else has to say. And I know at times, it's good to stand up for yourself. Not saying don't stand up for yourself, but saying there's better ways to do it. And sometimes the way that we push out a lot of negative energy or really bad intention just to hurt that person's feelings because we felt like they hurt our feelings. So that's what I can say the most on the ego. That's something that I feel like everybody has to work on, and it takes practice. It's not an easy thing to do, especially growing up, life in general, going through our experiences, going through day-to-day experiences. You have to really understand how your ego operates, what really gets to you, and I think that's a good way to deal with shadow work and having to recognize, hey, I don't have to get so offended with somebody else says. I can still stand up for myself without trying to just hurt someone or get under their skin. That's you having your ego serve you and knowing thyself. That's, I think, the balance of your crown chakra. So I feel like the crown chakra plays a good part in our ego. All chakras really, but I feel like that's the balance as well. Not necessarily feeling too connected to the physical of what somebody else has to say. And that can be hard as well, because another question I put on my notes is like, how can life affect your ego? And with life, basically, is like a lot of us go through our own different traumas, our own different branches of traumas, and there's no such thing as trauma being necessarily, I can say, trauma is trauma, regardless of how the level of severity that people may put it, or the polarity of what people think maybe this be worse than this. I feel like trauma is trauma. Your ego, basically, when it's going through this trauma, like we come into the life as babies, right? We come in and we don't necessarily, the way every person around us or the energy around us, the environment affects how we basically move and operate each day. So it's like how we operate through our ego, how we operate through how we respond to criticism or just anything that can hurt our feelings, And if you went through a lot of trauma or you had trauma in your life, I feel like your ego watched this trauma because it's something that's, your ego basically watched this trauma, and your ego is so, our ego is really powerful because it's like your ego will watch this trauma and then it will become what hurts you, and it's up to you to decipher between whether or not you want to be that or not. But it's like sometimes I feel like our ego is, well, actually I know our ego is important, but it's like, okay, your ego will mimic the trauma in your life, right? And the trauma, whatever hurt you, whoever criticized you, did whatever happened to you, your ego is in such protection mode after that happened because it hurt you so bad, it traumatized you. So it's like your ego, our brains are so powerful, it's like to the point where we'll go through stuff and we'll completely forget about it until we recollect and think about that stuff. So your ego will basically remember and become whatever traumatized you. And that's just something I learned and I remembered and understood on my conscious journey. So for example, like, let's say you had a bully or something growing up or something, and you might have got physical, or they may have said things to you or whatever, your ego paid attention to that and then became that. So anytime something triggers you, that person that hurt you comes out through your ego. But it's not necessarily a bad thing, not in the way that you look at it. It's basically like your ego is basically just protecting you. It's in defense mode. So it's like that hurting is mimicking what hurts you in order to be a protector. So it's like trying to balance whatever hurts you. It's kind of equal up to whatever hurts you. So whenever you're going through something else, maybe later on in life, and if something happens, that energy will pull back up. And it's like you have to understand whether or not bringing that energy is worth your time, because that energy hurt you or made you put fear in you or anything of the such, and it basically just mimics what hurts you. And that's why our ego can come through so strong. And if you know how to balance it, then it's really good, because then that's why you can really help you operate and create balance within your life. Especially if you know and recognize, okay, I'm in my ego right now, or my ego is coming in. You can really recognize how you can respond to people, especially at times, because we'll feel like if we get certain criticism or somebody might say something to us, it can trigger something in us, and then that's when your ego pops out. That whatever hurt you, pops out. Like for example, let's say slavery. Black people, melanated beings, if we went through slavery, and let's say we went through so much trauma through slavery, our ego necessarily could mimic whatever hurt us, like I said. And so then a lot of times I feel like in Black households, African American households, we brought a lot of things that traumatized us into the household necessarily, because that's all you knew, that's all your ego was seeing. And so it got to the point where I feel like people didn't necessarily couldn't recognize the difference between you becoming what hurt you. And so it's, you know how you hear the saying, basically, hurt people, basically. I feel like hurt people don't hurt people. I feel like hurt people choose to hurt other people. But you have to learn or understand or recognize or remember how you choose to hurt people, even though you've been hurt. And you really have to learn that. That's something that takes practice. That's something that takes learning. That's something that takes deep inner shadow work. That's something that a lot of people aren't willing to talk about, or it makes people uncomfortable. And I feel like I had this conversation with people before, and I had really thought deep about this. Like, you become what hurts you. A lot of people that be in their ego a lot and don't recognize they're in their ego went through a lot of trauma, and they don't recognize the difference between themselves and their ego. It got to the point where their ego began to be in such defense protective mode. So it's good to still love your ego and to know the importance of your ego, because your ego can help you and guide you and protect you, especially if you're in an uncomfortable environment. But once you get out that environment, or whatever happens, once you get into a space where you may not necessarily have to have too much of your ego coming through, that's when you have to recognize, okay, when do I want to put my ego out? When do I want to have my ego serve you necessarily? You're not supposed to serve your ego. Your ego is supposed to serve you. It's supposed to be your protector. It's a part of you. It's something that can't be just erased. That's the whole purpose of us having an ego. That's what I'm saying. And so when I spoke on slavery and trauma, or trauma in the family, or trauma with family members, or trauma with people, or just trauma in school, or trauma anywhere, or something that may have happened, we mimic whatever hurt us. And so that's why, because you don't come into the world just straight in your ego, because things you don't understand from right and wrong, even to say which is right and wrong, because everything is about intention. That's why I don't look at things as too much right and wrong. It's still good to be operating in the righteous manner, but it's also like everything is about the intention you put behind it. I feel like it can be, if you put negative intention out, then of course that same energy that you operating on, that same frequency, is going to automatically come back. It's like a circle. That's why the ego becomes whatever hurts somebody, or traumatizes, or it feels like it needs to defend for, made us uncomfortable. And why a lot of times a person being hurt will end up hurting someone else. And so I feel like the way that we can help kind of mediate that, stop that, or lower that, is to understand our ego. And a lot of people been through a lot of trauma ain't really willing to do that, because they feel like that's all they know. And it takes a lot of deep practice, a lot of deep inner work, a lot of people aren't willing to look back at something that may have traumatized them or hurt them. It could have been too severe for you, or too not understanding. And it takes a lot of practice, and that's why I feel like it's important to understand the physical and the spiritual, and understand how important it is as well as spiritual, because operating too much in the physical as well can lead you operating majorly in your ego as well. Not saying your ego can be horrible, but sometimes people's ego can be bad, and a lot of times you gotta ask yourself, a lot of times, why you may not like things, or how to, the reason you may or may not like stuff is because it's something about yourself you don't like. Like with some quote unquote racism, a lot of times people be racist or this and that, or white people, you know, be racist or whatever, is because they don't like themselves. And so they already don't like themselves. So they see you, and it's like everything that's a part of you that's bothering them is something that's bothering themselves within them. They feel like you a bother to them, or if somebody just doesn't like you in general, or they talk about how you look, or they talk about your size, your weight, your age, anything basically. They talk about anything that's completely physical. And that's the importance of not being. It's important to balance your spiritual and physical aspect of yourself, because if you're too much in this physical or too much in this, it can definitely be thrown off. But if somebody just doesn't necessarily like you, it's something about themselves they don't like. Or if they tell you they don't like this shirt or this and that, it's something that they wouldn't wear. They don't like your clothes, they don't like the jewelry you wear, they don't like how your hair is, they don't like your size, or anything like that. It's something about themselves that they couldn't see in that image, or something that they have to heal within themselves that hasn't necessarily been healed, for them not to like whatever it is that they may have talked about or said about you. And that's something I really learned on my conscious journey, and I'm still operating and learning each day. So I have to recognize, like, if somebody feels some type of way or this and that, like, it has nothing to do with me. It's very much everything to do with them. And me getting affected by why, you know, I feel like this, I have to remind myself, like, in order to respond better, which takes deep practice, someone else is getting upset about something, why should I have to get upset because they get upset? Why do I have to lower my vibration or my energy or what I'm feeling because someone else is bothered? Let them be bothered. So that takes a lot of practice, especially since a lot of people feel the need to follow people because there's certain people, a group of people feel this way. And that's why a lot of times it's hard to recognize your ego, because so many people feel this way, and you don't want to be the odd person out. That takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of mental strength, it takes a lot of deep understanding of self. And it's really hard with the society. They may all agree on one thing, like, you know. So that's the importance of, well, is recognizing your ego and basically knowing your sense of self. That's the whole importance of it. And that's why I say there's no such thing as an ego death. It's only an ego transformation. So a lot of people that go through a conscious journey, they go through or become consciously aware. I'm not even gonna say conscious journey, because when someone becomes more consciously aware in their present moment, in their spiritual aspect of themselves, then they understand how their ego can be basically how much they understand how much they may have operated in their ego and how much they may have been in defense. And then that's when they have the choice within themselves to choose how they want their ego to serve them, basically, and whether or not they want to keep staying in their ego. Especially, it takes deep choice to not necessarily operate in your ego, especially once you understand your ego. And then once you understand it, then that's when it's best to take, if you want balance within your life, which I feel like mostly everybody should and want to. If you want balance within your life, it's important to balance and have your ego serve you. So you should still love and accept your ego just as much as your higher self, because they're both parts of you. They're all connected, all equal, all one. It's all one, basically. But just breaking it up helps you better explain it, so that way it can better understand thyself, understand why we operate the way we do. And I feel like it's so important to know thyself and know your ego and stuff, because I feel like I make these talks, I do this podcast because I feel like this was stuff that I didn't really understand for a long time, going through things that I may have gone through in my own personal life. And I like to talk about it on my YouTube channel, on my podcast, and whatever social media platform I'm on, because then that way I feel like if someone else who don't understand the information but just trying to learn it or remember it or recognize it can watch my videos and actually relate. So yes, this is basically the podcast deep talk I wanted to do on my YouTube channel today. And I'm hoping y'all enjoyed this talk. I'm hoping y'all enjoyed this video. I'm hoping that I could have explained and got into a deeper depth of something that I had to understand for myself and still trying to understand each day, and deeper depths of recognizing your ego and also recognizing how you can necessarily identify your ego. And I also want to make it important before I close off too. Another way is to basically recognize how you can mediate your ego, or how you can recognize you're in your ego, is if something made you feel uncomfortable. Like if you feel out of sense, or you feel like you had to get in defense, or if it made you feel uncomfortable, that's another way too to recognize, okay, to check back with self after whatever happened and say, was that worth me defending myself or defending my time with? But with that being said, I'm glad y'all came to connect with me, engage, watch, and make sure y'all subscribe, make sure y'all follow me. Ashe.